When you reach out, is it an open hand or is it a jab? I think about this quite a lot in the sense of when we communicate with the other, whatever the other is in that situation. It might be a non-gamer. It might be someone who's into sport or not into sport. Whenever you reach out into the groups that you're normally not accustomed to, or the ones that you're not necessarily find yourself home in, how do you reach out when you communicate with these people? I did start off with more trivial examples like, oh, I'm not into StarCraft. How do I relate to people who are into StarCraft? But what about real life, deeper things like, people in different social, economic, I'd say boundaries. Boundaries is quite a negative word, but boundaries is what it seems like when, society does get quite rigid. But that kind of thing, when we're in different strata, different groups, it's a simple word. How do we reach out? And I think the biggest question is, what opportunities do we really have to cause change, not only within our own circles, but around other circles that we're not normally have access to or have constant repetitive access to, especially in the days of social media where you can kind of pick and choose where you want to be in effectively. Over the last month, other than just doing silly things and summer lifestyle things, I was at both a Belgian summer camp, like an English teaching Belgian summer camp, but also because I applied to be a prison officer, haha, went to a prison in my area. Can I name the prison? I think I can name the prison. If I'm not intending to apply, I think I can definitely name the prison. It was a Category C prison, and it's weird how I found it comparable to the summer camp in a way, because in both scenarios you have a situation where you have the people that reside in there, but also the staff, and then there's this need for like respectful connection between the staff and the persons, the product, you could call them the product, the prisoner or the child who's been sent on this summer school to learn English. They technically are the product themselves, including being technically the customer, if you know what I mean. And the general idea is that the employees have the responsibility over the people, trapped at summer school, or actually, locked up in prison for a crime they've committed and been convicted of. And that in both situations, there's this collective aim of developing the person who is here for this fixed term, whether that be 7 days or 7 years. Now, I say this because obviously when we think of kids summer camp, when you think of especially a focused one, partially educational one, like what I did, where, you're here teaching these kids, and then the idea of development is obviously not a foreign word. You want them to get as much as possible. You want to take them out of a situation. You want them to go back into their society with more and being able to offer more. But this might seem a bit more strange when we talk about prisoners, for example, people who, as members of society, normally quite law-abiding citizens, might have a problem with, letting them back into society too quickly, especially in situations of like extreme crime. Like you have, I can't remember his name. I don't want to remember his name. For example, the kid who committed a rape and was out in 6 months, that kind of thing. Often you don't think of, oh, we want to develop this person. You'd argue that the point of development is too late. It's too late to try and reach out to him in that manner. He's actually a rapist. He's not a potential rapist or someone who doesn't respect women. He's actually committed the act. And you could say it's be quite strange to think of it as from this development model. However, regardless, the aim is the same. If we are to let people out of prison, and people do have this fixed sentence of 6 years or so, I'd like to think, and I think most people would like to think, that these people come out as better people, because the key aim is to not reoffend. It's like the key aim with an English summer camp is that they can actually have more skills when they walk out. And they walk out with these skills and they can do more, so they're not held back in society, you know. I think it's easier to talk about that because it's just about, they're not at the threshold of, if they don't come to the summer camp, they're going to cause damage. They'll just do more in the world and with themselves and help impact the community. Maybe one of these days, one of these kids could be a teacher of some sort, or could be some form of skills giver to someone else, you know, where it seems harder to reach out to those who have kind of chosen to ostracize themselves from like mainstream society, or those who have been quite blocked by those that are around. Now, I relate to prison in that way because, you know, you're marked as a criminal, you're marked as an enemy of progress in some sense. Much in the same way, you know, in the political sphere, how people with different ideologies will mark each other as enemies of progress in some way, you know, talking about cuts to funding, or what some people may call, you know, unfeasible policies, unenforceable policies, these things, and how it halts the productivity of the country, however you measure that, via economic gain or prestige, or how well it provides for its citizens, you know, these things. But I feel it's important to regard these people, you know, 12-year-old French kids, French-speaking kids, you know, 35-year-old criminals, and, you know, politically opposed people is a good catch-all term, I guess. Politically diverse people or socially diverse people who have different cultures, as, you know, regard these persons as that, like these persons with nuances. The fact that most people can be reached to in some form or some way, you know, regardless of the fact if you might not be able to see that at face value. You know, some people can easily clock on and say, okay, because a lot of people are actually willing to have a proper intellectual discussion, and you can reach people through that way and through debate in a comment section. But some people obviously are so far down the ideology hole that, you know, even getting in contact with them without it turning to a flame war is impossible. But I think the hardest thing with human interaction is that those who need the help most will often kind of drag away from it. But these are the people that have to reach out the most. It's the classic, you know, preaching to the converted thing, you know, how, you know, if I was a priest, preaching to a church congregation, a willing church congregation is nice, but if I'm trying to make a real impact and trying to, you know, save souls for Christ, for example, you know, I would need to be out there doing actions. It might not be the most direct preaching, but indirectly, you know, showing who I am and saying, oh, this is who I've become as a follower of this ideology or whatever. But whatever, you know. And that reminds me of the thing about how often flame wars happen because, you know, these things, you know, personal things become political things, you know, how your life is impacted, how your society is impacted, and how your beliefs coming from the circle you grew up in and the circle that raised you, that influenced your belief system, but also the things you've experienced and how that changes you, and how you think, oh, I used to believe this, but I really don't believe this anymore. I feel this should not be ever the case. You know, I don't think anyone should ever be in some form of apartheid system, or I really believe in free markets, whatever. And how these things you get passionate about and get angry at other people when they believe other things because, you know, they affect you. But also, I think there's also another side where you can only truly get angry if you truly care about, maybe it sounds weird, if you truly care about people in some way because you see a bit of yourself in them as a politically motivated person yourself. But also, I think it would be a strange thing to think you'd get angry at them if you truly didn't believe that they could do better and think more critically, or try and open up the range of perspectives that they allow. I truly think, you know, that why would you get angry at someone unless you truly believe that they could actually improve who they are being as a person, you know? Like, a common sentiment that seems to be said in recent years is not that people are angry or people are surprised, it's that people are just disappointed. You know, people are no longer surprised by what the opposition does because everyone's so vocal and everyone's so outlandish, especially on social media, for example, that, you know, you're often just furthermore disappointed and become, you know, to this place we have less and less, you know, faith in other people, which is often what causes the slow decline of society or economy. If you have no faith that people will pay back loans, for example, then why would you give up more loans? Less people can invest in things, and bada boom, we all stagnate in society, you know, because we're caught up by, you know, pure ideology, to quote Zizek once more. I also think about online mediums and how we interact and how, you know, these things, because it's global telecommunications, are supposed to help us interact with each other and help challenge each other. But obviously we've become a lot more locked up in the groups we're in. But then I always say blame the user, not the product, like Twitter or Facebook, for just providing a platform for these toxic people. But I think there's little things, for example, knowing the suitability of the platform you're on compared to what you were doing. So for example, I always say Twitter is made for statements. You've got a short character limit. So that means a lot of things that you say can be taken out of context. Now, if you put the statement out to the audience that matches you, then, you know, millions of retweets, right? Because they have all the ideology that you have and all the pathways of thinking that you have. But once someone opposed sees that, they can take that out of proportion and exaggerate even what you said or what you meant, because you might not exactly have the nuance, because 140 characters is normally not enough to provide the nuance without having a super long thread of, oh, I looked at these graphs and I looked at this, and because of all these events that come together, and I thought about this and I thought about this, you know, you don't normally have these things. So it's hard to really explain a point quickly, and Twitter's made for quickly scrolling, you know, and reacting. You know, you have this situation of the recently fired L'Oreal model talking about how all white people are racist, and how, you know, that statement standing out may seem obviously belligerent, but, you know, it's like looking at the things behind that, like how that's based on the argument, for example, that if one is not helping to end some form of oppression, that they are actively, or at least inactively, taking part in it, which is a lot of people would argue, especially with blatant things, you know, either they're unwilling or unknowledgeable or unknowing. And why are they unknowing? Are they unknowing because of the circles they're in, for example? You know, you look at all these things, and then if they're in that locked off circle that, you know, tells people, oh, the race issues don't really exist anymore, it's fine, that was such a 60s thing, you know, then they'll see this and see it as directly belligerent, and then people end up getting fired over this because of controversy. And, you know, companies don't really like controversy unless it drives a lot of indirect sale revenue, you know. So we see how reaching out can be cool, but then in the same way, how do we reach out? Is the way she could have said it differently? Is a different medium that could have allowed her to explain her points fully, for example? That's just one example of commentary on the other, how we talk about the other and politically opposed. I think it's important to always check up and remember the ideology that you think with and you write with, along with the ideology of people write with, especially on places like Twitter, where you can't really fill out the nuance every time. You know, I remember there's probably another way to really engage and really talk about the issues and start that slow train of thought that leads us all closer to, you know, a greater world, a brighter progress, you know. But yeah,